Hello everyone, this is the final PYQ series for the Political Science Plus 2 students. So in this series, I would like to cover the part 1 remaining chapters 8, 9 and the part 2 all chapters. Chapter 8 Regional Aspirations. Question number 1. What were the main provisions of the Rajiv Gandhi Longawal Accord or Punjab Accord? So here you need to clearly know about the year 1985 and what are the main provisions in this accord, like the transfer of Chandigarh, water disputes, relief for the victims, territorial issues, and also covers Punjabi speaking areas, rehabilitation of army deserters, control of projects, reduction of armed forces, Sikh identity. Question number 2. Explain the internal and external dimensions of the Kashmir issue. So here, the external one, the Pakistan claims Kashmir should belong to it and control a part of the region also. It's also known as the Azad Kashmir since a tribal invasion in 1947. Internally, the Article 370, which was granted to the JNK, was already revoked. So a group of population also claiming that it is against the Kashmir identity. Next, talk about the Kashmiri grievances, the plebiscite demand of the population. Then the erosion of autonomy here means that they want the restoration of the statehood. Then the democratic deficit that is happening in JNK. Third question, describe various issues related to regional aspirations in the Northeast using the hints like demand for autonomy, secessionist movements against outsiders. So here each topic you have to take separately. First one, Northeast regional aspirations and issues. We have to cover the geography and the demography of the region, the political reorganization, the statehood given to each and every region. Next, secessionist movement in Mizoram and Nagaland region. An anti-outsiders movement, the Assam movement demanded the deportation of illegal migrants. And then finally, 1985, Assam Accord aimed to address these issues but left some areas unresolved. What are the challenges faced by this region are isolation, economic neglect, and complex ethnic dynamics that fuels the regional demands. So that will lead to many disturbances in the region. Chapter 9 Recent Developments in Indian Politics. First question. Towards the end of 1980s, 5 major developments occurred which brought a long-lasting impact on Indian politics. Explain those developments. The first one is the Congress defeat in 1989, which led to the decline of the so-called Congress system. Then the Mandal issue related to the OBC reservation. Economic reforms, the economic restructuring that happened in 1991 with the implementation of new economic policy like LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization. The Babri Masjid demolition, Rajiv Gandhi's assassination. Second question, write the 4 elements of consensus emerged among most parties in contemporary Indian politics. First one, agreement on economic policies, acceptance of backward caste claims, role of state level parties, the distinction between state and national parties has blurred, then pragmatism over ideology, that the coalition politics prioritizing the power sharing over ideological differences. Chapter 10 The Cold War Era. Explain the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, the Soviet support to the Cuba, then missile deployment. The Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. Then this missile could strike the US from close range. So President John F. Kennedy ordered American warships to block Soviet ships from reaching Cuba. Then US and USSR were on the brink of nuclear war. And after these tensions, the USSR agreed to remove the missiles, avoiding the war. Chapter 11 The End of Bipolarity. First one, trace the causes and consequences of the disintegration of Soviet Union or USSR. The key points on the disintegration of the Soviet Union include bureaucracy and authoritarianism. Then economic challenges, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan worsened the economic conditions, leading to stagnation, consumer shortages and increased food imports. Thirdly, Gorbachev reforms like the glasnost openness and perestroika, the restructuring policies, faced opposition within the Communist Party. Fourth point, collapse of communist bloc. In 1991, Russia, Ukraine and Belarus declared the USSR disbanded, marking the end of Soviet Union. And the other issues like economic stagnation, failure to meet the citizens' needs, and burden of military spending weakened the USSR. Second question, consequences of the Soviet Union's disintegration. End of Cold War confrontation, the ideological conflict between socialism and capitalism ended. Shift in the global power, the capitalism and liberal democracy became dominant worldwide. Then emergence of new countries, the new nations with independent aspirations emerged. Third question, the model of transition in Russia, Central Asia and East Europe that was influenced by the World Bank and IMF came to be known as the shock therapy. So the answer, transition to capitalism, the shift from socialism to capitalism, focusing on private ownership. The economic and political changes like the external orientation shifted to trade, foreign investment and deregulation. Then the large-scale privatization led to wealth disparities. Then collapse of the social welfare system, pushing many into poverty. Then weakened the democratic institutions. What are the consequences of shock therapy? The collapse of state-controlled industries causing mass unemployment, high inflation, decline in the value of Russian currency, increase in hoarding and black markets, food shortages due to the collapse of collective farming, decline in internal production, worsening the economic crisis, destruction of social welfare systems causing hardship for ordinary citizens, brain drain as intellectuals and skilled workers migrated, and the rise of mafia which controlled many economic activities. Chapter 12, US Hegemony in World Politics. Question number 1. After the Cold War, USA dominated all spheres of international politics. Discuss the hegemonic power and explain 3 areas of hegemony, like hegemony as hard power, hegemony as structural power, and hegemony as soft power. So in hegemony as hard power, here it's meaning the global military power of US. The dominance, then comes the technological edge, historical role, and the limitations like challenges in managing the occupied regions as seen in the Iraq that exposes the weakness of the country. Secondly, hegemony as structural power. Here, structural hegemony involves a dominant power shaping global economic and institutional systems. Like the role of hegemony, US influence controls 24% of the global economy, the dominates trade and leads the key institutions like World Bank, IMF and WTO, World Trade Organization. Then the cultural impact, and the US structural power sustains its dominance across economic and cultural domains. Thirdly, the soft power is the ability to persuade through cultural and ideological influences rather than the coercion or force. So the manufacturing the consent, like dominant powers shape the global perceptions to favor their interest. Then the Cold War success of US, and the soft power becomes natural and unnoticed, sustaining the US global dominance now. Second question, what are the strategies to overcome the hegemony? So the bandwagon strategy, that some argue that working with the hegemon to gain benefits is more practical than opposing it. Then the hiding strategies, the resistance from non-state actors like the media that's forming links to challenge the US policies, and the concept of global village. Chapter 13, Alternative Centers of Power. First question, explain the political, economic and military influences of European Union. Firstly, the political influence, the formation and evolution in 1992. The political cooperation, that the European Union developed a common foreign and security policy. Political cooperation through the European Parliament and efforts to expand the membership, especially from the former Soviet bloc. Secondly, economic influence, like the trade dominance. The European Union has a larger share of world trade than the US, which strengthens its position in trade dispute, particularly with the US and China. Then euro as a threat. The euro, the European Union's currency, challenges the US dollar's dominance. Next, military influence, the military strength of European Union, their nuclear capability, space and technology, and their defense agreements. Second question, the Chinese economy has undergone several transformations. Identify the developmental strategy adopted by China. The key word is developmental strategies. So, the economic reforms, open door policy, privatization and growth, global trade. The China became the world's top destination for foreign direct investment (FDI), and they joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, deepening integration into the global economy. Then the economic inequality that is taking place there, the regional and global influences. Chapter 14, Contemporary South Asia. The first question is about India and Bangladesh relationship. So here the content is issues like the dispute over sharing Ganga and Brahmaputra waters. Then comes the boundary resolution. The boundary dispute was resolved in 2015 through enclave exchanges. The cooperation areas like the India's Act East policy. Then both countries aim to broaden the cooperation by addressing the common threats and enhancing mutual sensitivity. Secondly, India and Sri Lanka, how the democracy is retained there, the ethnic tensions between the Sinhala community and the Tamil community, then the Tamil secession demand. The armed conflict ended in 2009 with the defeat of the LTT. Then, despite the prolonged violence, Sri Lanka achieved significant economic growth, high human development, population control, economic liberalization, and highest regional per capita GDP. Despite this internal strife, Sri Lanka sustained its democratic institutions and social progress. Next question, SAARC contributions to cooperation in South Asia. Here, the SAARC was established in 1985 with the goal of fostering regional cooperation among South Asian countries. And SAARC focuses on economic, social, and cultural development, aiming to address the common regional challenges and improve the mutual understanding. And the SAFTA agreement in 2004 is also a good initiative. South Asia Free Trade Agreement aims to boost the intra-regional trade, helping countries reduce the trade barriers and encouraging the economic growth and peace-building efforts, as well as the collaborative initiatives like increasing the cultural, scientific, and economic cooperation with an emphasis on resolving disputes and sharing resources. The political differences and mistrust among the members have hindered the SAARC's effectiveness over the years, but SAARC's future success depends on overcoming these regional tensions and fostering deeper integration to ensure long-term peace and cooperation. Chapter 15, International Organizations. First question, write your arguments in favor of India's claim for the permanent membership in the UN Security Council. So, support for the UN reform. India advocates for the restructuring of UN, emphasizing the need for a stronger and more inclusive UN to promote development and cooperation. Then the Security Council composition, that India claims that the UNSC has remained outdated, like there is no change in the number of permanent members since 1965, despite the significant expansion of the UN General Assembly membership. Thirdly, the representation of developing countries, increased membership, that India supports an increase in both permanent and non-permanent membership of the UNSC, citing the expanded activities of the Security Council and the importance of political support from the international community. Then India's credentials, like as a second most populous country. Now India is presently the most populous country, overtaking China, the world's largest democracy, and the active participation in the UN peacekeeping efforts. India claims that it deserves a permanent seat, and it also contributes financially to the UN. The symbolic importance of getting membership in the UN Security Council, because the permanent membership symbolizes the growing global influence, enhancing a country's foreign policy status. The neighboring countries like Pakistan and other nations express concerns about India's nuclear capabilities and its relations with Pakistan, questioning its ability to be an effective permanent member. Second question, is the United Nations a balance to the US dominance? So it's saying that the many nations wanted the UN to counterbalance US power. Then the US military and economic strength is also challenged. Then, despite the limitation, UN fosters global discussions addressing issues like war, climate change, and terrorism. The UN is relevant but struggles to check the US power effectively in a unipolar world. Third question, explain the principal organs of the United Nations organization. So here I'm just covering the names only. The General Assembly, which is also known as the World Parliament, then Security Council. It consists of 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. Next, the Economic and Social Council, International Court of Justice, which consists of 15 judges elected for 9-year term. Then the Trusteeship Council, which already suspended on 1994. Then the Secretariat. The Secretary General is chosen from non-permanent member states. Chapter 16, Security in the Contemporary World. First question, explain any 4 new sources of global security threats. It's very important. First one, terrorism, then human rights violation, global poverty, migrations, that large-scale movement of people creates economic and political challenges, then the health epidemics. Second question, what are the components of the India's security strategy? Increase the military capabilities, strengthen international institutions, strengthen Indian democracy, and strengthen India economically. Chapter 17, Environment and Natural Resources. It's a very general chapter. Okay, so try to understand and gain maximum score from this chapter. The world faces several environmental concerns. Identify any 3 amongst them. I'm giving more options, but at least you try to remember 3. Decline in cultivable land because of rapid urbanization and industrialization, water pollution, deforestation, pollution of coastal areas, ozone depletion, global warming, and over-exploitation of natural resources. Second question, India's stand on environmental issues is always positive. Identify the programs adopted by India for environmental protection. So the answer includes a natural auto fuel policy that promotes cleaner fuels for vehicles, the Electricity Act of 2003, natural gas imports and clean coal technologies reflect India's commitment to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Prepare a short note on the concept of common but differentiated responsibility. So, the northern and southern countries have different views on ecological conservation. The developed or the northern countries want all nations to share equal responsibility, but the developing southern countries argue that the industrialized nations caused more damage and should take greater responsibilities. This idea of common but differentiated responsibilities is already given in the Raya Declaration of 1992. Final chapter, globalization. Explain the political consequences of globalization. It harmed the country's sovereignty, weakened the nation's welfare role, affected national decision-making ability, helped states gather more data on citizens. Second question, explain the economic consequences of globalization. It increased the global trade, destroyed cottage industries, which is a negative one, then centralized markets is a positive one, led to the rise of multinational companies, it's damaged the third world economies, and it's reduced the importance of local products. Third question, briefly explain the cultural consequences of globalization. It created a uniform global culture. Western culture dominated, threatened local traditions, influenced people's thoughts and desires. Thank you everyone for hearing Think Socio. All the best for your exams. Thank you everyone for hearing Think Socio.